Hi, this is Andre, and thanks for checking out Synthisophy. Synthisophy is scientifically integrating the wisdoms of history, based on fact and truth, into our present culture. We're going to take a look today at chapter 25, Unneurealism on Left. Or, more specifically, the same Unneurealism exists on the left. As we saw in chapter 24, Unneurealism exists on the far right. What about the far left? Recall this statement in chapter 21. The word tribe has been used recently in the news to describe our current political layout, saying 40% of the population are devoted far right and 40% are devoted far left. And each are using cognitive and confirmation bias and argumentative theory to support their views. Apparently, only 20% of the population may have a more realistic, centrist political perspective. The other 80% are genetically, cognitively, confirmationally, and argumentatively biased to the left and right, each stoked by the tribal and warrior ethos. As the alt-right was mentioned earlier, the ultra-left neuroreality also appears to be off the mark. So the following will be quotes from the book, The Silencing: How the Left is Killing Free Speech, by Kirsten Powers. With a few statements added by myself. Quote, "People who routinely demonize those who express the wrong views are what I," and now we're talking Kristen Powers, "call the illiberal left. They are most prevalent on college campuses and in the media, not insignificant perches from which to be quashing debate and dissent, but their tentacles are expanding into every sector of society. They consider themselves liberals, but act in direct contradiction to the fundamental liberal values of free speech, debate, and dissent. What distinguishes them from mainstream liberals and your average Democrat is not so much what they believe, but how they believe it. Most people who reside on the left side of the political spectrum can tolerate difference of opinion without turning into authoritarian speech police. They can either engage or ignore people with whom they disagree. The illiberal left, on the other hand, believes that people who express ideological, philosophical, or political views that don't line up with their preferences, their neurorealities, should be completely silenced. Instead of using persuasion and rhetoric to make a positive case for their causes and views, they work to delegitimize the person making the argument through character assassination, demonization, and dehumanizing tactics. These are the self-appointed overlords, activists, university administrators, journalists, and politicians who have determined what views are acceptable to express. So shut up, or else. The illiberal left yearns for a world sanitized of information that offends them. Is this 1984? So why not just tune out the views they don't like? They can't. They are authoritarians at heart. They know what Americans should think and what information they should consume. Sounds like newspeak to me. So they launch petitions to have particular views censored from newspapers. They try to get columnists fired for expressing the wrong views. The illiberal left knows that delegitimization works. It's their strongest weapon in a country with unparalleled free speech protections. If you can't suppress views you don't like with repressive laws, then delegitimize the people expressing them. When one thinks of suppressing speech and engaging in ideological witch hunts, Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy is the name that comes to mind. McCarthy's ruthless campaign to root out those he believed to be disloyal to the United States spawned the term McCarthyism, to refer to the practice of making false accusations against political or ideological enemies in an effort to delegitimize and silence them. Because many of the silencing tactics employed by the illiberal left do not involve the government, though some do, particularly at public universities, the illiberal left will often claim they are not infringing on anybody's right to free speech. This willfully misses the point. Freedom requires more than the structures of freedom, such as liberal constitution and a just legal system. It requires the spirit of freedom, which is passed from generation to generation. This insight, which comes from the 18th century philosopher Montesquieu, who famously applied to the United States by Alexis de Tocqueville in his book Democracy in America, in which he observed that America owes its freedom not so much to the law as to the habits of the heart of freedom-loving American citizens. The illiberal left is eradicating these habits of the heart, so Americans won't even remember what it was like to be able to speak freely without fear of having a retaliation from a silencing mob or a few disgruntled lefties. Mankind ought to have a rational assurance that all objections have been satisfactorily answered. And how are they to be answered if that which requires to be answered is not spoken? Asked British philosopher John Stuart Mill in his book On Liberty. And he went on, or how can the answer be known to be satisfactory if the objectors have no opportunity of showing that it is unsatisfactory? The more success the illiberal left has in terrorizing people who express dissenting views, the fewer objections there will be. Most people understandably just want to do their jobs and support their families. Given the choice between being shunned by their peers or losing their job for a personal view, they will almost always choose silence over confrontation. Because of this, society should always err on the side of respecting people's right to determine their own beliefs and express them without fear of official or unofficial retribution. Debate and persuasion should be the reflexive response to disagreement and even harmful propositions, not an authoritarian impulse to silence. It should be so not only because it is just, but because no society can flourish without the clash of ideas. Harvard psychology professor and best-selling author Steven Pinker invoked the critical role free speech plays in a democratic system in a 2014 speech. We acquire knowledge through a process called conjecture and refutation, he said. We come up with ideas about the nature of reality and test them against that reality, allowing the world to falsify the mistaken ones. The conjecture part of this formula, of course, presupposes the exercise of free speech. We offer conjectures without any prior assurance they are correct. It is only by brooding ideas and seeing which ones withstand attempts to refute them that we acquire knowledge. End quote. This is a description of science and the scientific method of studying the real world based on fact and truth. The behavior of the illiberal left flies in the face of decades of jurisprudence forged by the liberal Supreme Court justices who argued for an expansive view of the First Amendment and treated free speech as a precious commodity to be guarded jealously. Those who want our independence believe that freedom to think as you will and to speak as you think are means indispensable to the discovery and spread of political truth, wrote Supreme Court Justice Louis B. Brandeis in 1927. The illiberal left isn't just ruining reputations and lives with their campaigns of delegitimization and disparagement. They are harming all of society by silencing important debates, denying people the right to draw their own conclusions, and derailing reporting and research that is important to our understanding of the world. They are robbing culture of this diversity of thought that is so central to learning and discovery. In 2011 speech, then University of Virginia social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who described himself politically as a liberal turned centrist, explained, if a circle groups around sacred values, they'll evolve into a tribal moral community They'll embrace science whenever it supports their sacred values, but they'll ditch it or distort it as soon as it threatens a sacred value. Their cognitive and confirmation bias and argumentative theory, their tribal instinct, their neuroreality. Sacralizing distorts thinking. Sacred values bind teams together and then blinds them to the truth. That's fine if you are a religious community, but this is not fine for scientists. Recall, science is the study of the real world based on fact and truth. Haight believes that the fact that conservatives are underrepresented by a ratio of 200 or 300 to 1 in social psychology in college and universities is evidence that we are a tribal moral community that actively discourages conservatives from entering. Allowing for more diversity of ideological thought would lead to better science and freer thinking, concluded Haight. The argument doesn't just apply to academia. It applies to any facet of society where non-liberal views are deemed out of bounds. This is not the kind of world we want. Educated people, noted Pinker in extolling the virtues of free speech, should be acutely aware of human fallibility, most notably their own, and appreciate that people who disagree with them are not necessarily stupid or evil. Accordingly, they should appreciate the value of trying to change minds by persuasion rather than by intimidation or demagoguery. But as this book demonstrates, the left's commitment to free speech is collapsing. In its place, the liberal left is executing a campaign of coercion and intimidation. I call it silencing. In his book, In Less Than Human, Why We Demean, Enslave, and Exterminate Others, social philosopher and psychologist David Livingston Smith explores the enduring practice of dehumanizing individuals we don't like or with whom we disagree. He shows how ancient cultures and modern societies operate similarly in that groups that seek to maintain or expand their power base will often systematically question and attack the very core of their enemies' human identities. Is this what Homo sapiens did when they left Africa 70,000 years ago and conquered the world? If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. That is a quote from George Orwell. In March 2014, a feminist studies associate professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, physically attacked a 16-year-old girl who had been handing out anti-abortion literature in a public space on campus. The professor, Dr. Muriel Miller-Young, later told a police officer that she was justified in her attack because the literature and graphic abortion signs displayed by the anti-abortion rights group were disturbing and offensive. She was particularly offended, she said, because she was pregnant and teaches reproductive rights. The police officer who interviewed Miller-Young asked what crimes she felt the anti-abortion rights group had committed. Miller-Young told the officer that coming to campus and showing graphic imagery was insensitive to the community and claimed the pro-life group may have violated university policy. In fact, the group staged their demonstration in the campus free speech zone, as the university policy dictated. And they actually violated a university policy that still would not have made their actions criminal or inviting a physical attack. Nonetheless, throughout the police report, Miller-Young was unrepentant. The police report continues. Miller-Young said that her actions today were in defense of her students and her own safety. Miller-Young also suggested that the group had violated her rights. The officer asked Miller-Young what rights the group had violated, and she responded, "My personal right to go to work and not be in harm." But there was no harm done to Miller-Young. She just couldn't tolerate the expression of views with which she disagreed. So she attacked a teenage girl. Miller-Young's behavior, while indefensible, is easily understood if one considers the ideological confines of the illiberal left. Seeing through this intolerant and narrow lens, disagreement is violence. The defending them is akin to physical assault. They are so isolated from the marketplace of ideas that when confronted with a view they don't like, they feel justified in doing whatever they can to silence that speech. When the case went to trial, the jury took a different view of the situation, and Miller Young was convicted of theft and battery. Incredibly, she remains a professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She was never sanctioned for her behavior. On the contrary, peers and university administrators robustly defended her. At least 12 university professors sent letters to the court attesting to her character and describing her as an open-minded bridge builder. She was treated as a victim in the case, and letter after letter complained of the critical press coverage her actions received, as though it was unmerited. Dr. Stephanie Batiste, an associate professor in UCSB's Department of Black Studies and English, expressed sympathy with Miller Young's reaction to the activists, reimaging the bullying that ended in a physical altercation as a simple and understandable outgrowth of Miller Young's kindness combined with her commitment to justice. She described Miller Young as a giving, sensitive person with a good heart, and said she was instinctively kind. Miller Young is so kind that she never directly apologized to the girl she attacked or to the students she intimidated and mocked and attempted to silence. Instead, in a naked attempt to gain leniency, Miller Young provided the court with a written apology. As the mother of the victim noted to the court, the apology says nothing about her pushing, grabbing, and scratching my daughter. The letter also doesn't explain her lack of contrition with the police officer, or why a week after the incident she retweeted a tweet by one of her supporters who said that she would stand with Miller Young until that whiny little bigot eats her accusation with a barbed fork. But really, whether she is kind or not is beside the point. No one has ever suggested that Miller Young should be prevented from expressing disagreement, outrage, or even anger at the demonstration. The students were, in fact, happy to debate the topic with her. That was why they were there. What Miller Young is not free to do, as a matter of law, is steal property or physically attack other people because she has been exposed to views that upset her. Separate from the law, it's alarming that there is not a broader agreement that a professor shouldn't abuse her power to intimidate young people and attempt to silence their views. Even had she stood on the right side of the law, Miller Young should not have been considered innocent in the eyes of the university or her peers. The academics defending Miller Young pretend that she was held hostage and forced to look at images that offended her. Miller Young was in possession of 2 legs that she could quite easily have used to walk away from the sign that she claims sent her over the edge. In her letter in support of Miller Young, Erica Lorraine Williams, an associate professor of anthropology at Spelman College, blasted the media's depictions of Miller Young as a crazed feminist studies professor who bullies and taunts young people. But that's exactly what she did. She proudly recounted it to a police officer, and there's a video of it. One can only imagine what would happen if a conservative professor who opposed abortion rights harassed, pushed, and scratched a pro-abortion rights activist and then stole and destroyed her sign. It would have led the evening newscasts under the War on Women banner and made the front page of the New York Times. The professor would have been fired within hours of the incident and escorted off the campus. This Orwellian climate of intimidation and fear chills free speech and thought. On college campuses, it is particularly insidious. Higher education should provide an environment to test new ideas, debate theories, encounter challenging information, and figure out what one believes. Campuses should be places where students are able to make mistakes without fear of retribution. If there is no margin for error, it is impossible to receive a meaningful education. The University of California, Santa Barbara is blazing the trigger warning trail. In March of 2014, the same month, Professor Miller Young told the police officer that she attacked a student because she felt triggered by a demonstration, the student government formally called on the university to mandate that all professors employ trigger warnings, which is a resolution to mandate warnings for triggering content in academic settings. Demanded a policy that would require professors to alert students of potential triggering material and allow students to miss classes containing such material without losing course points. Hypersensitivity to the trauma allegedly inflicted by listening to controversial ideas approaches a strange form of derangement, a disorder whose lethal spread in academia grows by the day, said by free speech advocate Harvey Silvergate. He went on, what should be the object of derision, a focus of satire, is instead the subject of serious academic discussion and precautionary warnings. For this disorder, there is no effective quarantine. A whole generation of students soon will have imbibed the warped notions of justice and entitlement now handed down as dogma, neurorealities, in the universities. Do students think that once they graduate, they will be able to opt out of anything they don't like? If colleges and universities encourage that attitude, they are not educating students. They are perpetuating their immaturity and fostering intolerance. The phrase free speech zone should be jarring to any American. The entire country is and should be a free speech zone. Yet on many college campuses, the public expression of views is relegated to tiny specks requiring university pre-approval for use. The University of Cincinnati's free speech zone accounted for just 0.1% of the campus. Students were required to register 10 days in advance of their planned expression of free speech, and if they failed to do so, could be charged with trespassing. It seems absurd, except to the illiberal left, that on a college campus, sharing ideas, handing out flyers, even distributing copies of the Constitution, has to be relegated to a limited space controlled by university administrators. Free speech zones ostensibly exist to create a safe environment for the expression and exchange of ideas. In reality, they serve as tools to regulate and discourage dissent and free speech. These bureaucratic roadblocks dissuade students from engaging in peaceful expression and protest, both of which should be regular occurrences on college campuses. In 2014, students at the University of Central Florida noticed that their free speech zone, which previously included the entire patio in front of the student union, had been reduced to a tiny area of inclined grass. A student at Modesto Junior College in California was denied the right to hand out copies of the U.S. Constitution on Constitution Day by campus police. He was informed by a clerical staffer in the Student Development Office that there was no room in the free speech area, which the staffer referred to as that little cement area. Apparently, the two other students were expressing free speech that day, and our budding free speech activist was informed the next available date for him to hand out the U.S. Constitution was several days hence, which obviously would no longer be Constitution Day. The U.S. Constitution seems to be a particular target of the illiberal left busybodies who dominate taxpayer-funded schools. In April 2014, two students sued the University of Hawaii at Hilo for preventing them from distributing the Constitution. A few months later at Penn State, members of the Young Americans for Freedom set up a table to hand out constitutions. The administration, which had violated its own previous commitment to dismantle the zones, told the YAF students that their use of the table to hand out materials violated a university policy against unregistered structures. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg delivering the 2014 commencement speech to Harvard University noted the alarming trend on America's college campuses of silencing commencement speakers on the basement of protests, often by vocal minority. Bloomberg, who himself had been the target of protests demanding his invitation to speak be withdrawn, hit on the irony at the root of this phenomenon. It's open-minded liberals who are leading the charge to limit the expression of viewpoints on college campuses. Is this doublethink? He said, in each case, liberals silenced the voice of individuals they deemed politically objectionable. This is an outrage. Today on many college campuses, it's the liberals trying to repress conservative ideas, even as conservative faculty members are at risk of becoming an endangered species. Bloomberg continued, like other great universities, Harvard lies at the heart of the American experiment in democracy. Their purpose is not only to advance knowledge, but to advance the ideals of our nation. Tolerance for other people's ideas and the freedom to express your own are inseparable values at great universities. Bloomberg continued, joined together, they form a sacred trust that holds the basis of our democratic society, but that trust is perpetually vulnerable to the tyrannical tendencies of monarchs, mobs, and majorities. And lately, we've seen those tendencies manifest themselves too often, both on college campuses and our society. How do you like those neurorealities? Here's another quote from George Orwell in 1984. The thought police would get him just the same. He had committed, would still have committed, even if he had never set pen to paper, the essential crime that contained all others in itself. Thought crime, they called it. Thought crime is not a thing that could be concealed forever. You might dodge successfully for a while, even for years. But sooner or later, they were bound to get you. For liberals, free speech is a fundamental value. Debate is a good thing. So is tolerance for differing viewpoints. But the illiberal left rejects the idea of free speech and tolerance. They believe that views that don't align with their ideology should be silenced. A Baltimore Sun article quoted a female student complaining that with Voice for Life, group members would be approaching students and talking to them about how abortion is immoral. That's an impingement on someone's personal beliefs. Here, at one of the nation's most elite universities, a student truly believes that another person expressing a viewpoint with which another person disagrees is impinging on someone's personal beliefs. Actually, it's called dialogue, free speech, or debate. The neurorealities of the illiberal left, as we just described, are quite far from actual reality. Consider earlier mentioned the neurorealities of Einstein and his theories of relativity, Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution, and Francis Bacon's description of the scientific method of thinking in his statement of confirmation bias. These are key perceptions of reality as they really exist. They are truth, and they are real. Let's call their perceptions neurreal. In these areas, Einstein, Darwin, and Bacon are neurrealists. They think neurreally. Their neurorealities are examples of Unneurealism and the neurreal. As far as the illiberal left's perceptions of reality, as we just described, they are unneurial. The illiberal left are unneurialists. They think unneurially. Their neurorealities are examples of unneurialism and the unreal. Or as Orwell said in 1984, the illiberal left doublethink and newspeak. As mentioned in Chapter 21, so does 40% of the current U.S. population who are adamantly leftist. As Vladimir Stalin said, they're useful idiots. As P.T. Barnum is known for saying, there's a sucker born every minute. In the extraordinary complex society of today, the instinctive cognitive biases, the resulting confirmation bias, argumentative theory, and the tribe mentality, stoked by the warrior ethos, may very well be present in the 100 billion neurons in our brain, helping to generate someone's perception of reality, someone's neuroreality. And as proposed by Anderson in Fantasyland, as well as by Powers in The Silencing, and expanded upon by myself, that neuroreality may not always be reflective of true reality. It may be unreal. It's in our genes. It's been in our genes for a very long time. Cognitive bias probably developing over the course of 200 million years of mammalian evolution, including Australopithecus, to confirmation bias in Homo habilis, to argumentative theory, where truth doesn't matter, winning the argument, and gaining tribal power does in Homo erectus, and the warrior ethos, an extension of the tribal ethos that led Homo sapiens out of Africa 70,000 years ago to dominate the world. The question to ask now is, what is the neuroreality of our nation? Read chapter 26 to find out.